in our number 10 spot, we have Leda and the Swan. In 2018, archaeologists made a cool but also kind of startling discovery as they were searching through the remains of the ancient city of Pompeii. Painted on a bedroom wall, archaeologists found a painting that depicts quite the sensual scene between the legendary Queen Leda and, well, a swan. Of course, it was Zeus disguised as a swan, but it's still a swan, and that's super weird. Zeus in disguise is said to have fallen into Leda's arms for protection from an eagle and then managed to seduce her, although there are some suggestions and interpretations that set a much darker scene. This discovery is unbelievable because seeing this kind of art on the wall of a bedroom of an ancient city that was destroyed by Mount Vesuvius erupting in 79 AD really makes you realize that 2,000 years is such a small amount of time in the history of Earth, and although we've progressed immensely, we're still the same humans. We just have slightly better taste in art. I honestly wish I could forget about this one. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Cloudbuster. Okay, this one is kind of pseudo-scientific, but it could have serious implications and is much better left as far in the past as possible. In the 1950s, a man named William Reich created a device called the Cloudbuster that could manipulate certain kinds of energy that would end up affecting the atmosphere, and this would then change the weather patterns. It is said that the machine could affect a type of energy called orgone energy, and it is said that there was actually a successful demonstration of this machine way back in the 50s. Apparently people have tried to recreate it but have been unsuccessful, and it's actually to the detriment of them and the area surrounding them. Honestly, we spend a lot of time messing with this planet. It makes me a little nervous, I'm not gonna lie. In our number 8 spot today, we have the zombie virus. I know The Walking Dead is a popular series, but none of us dream of living in that world. At least I hope not. What a literal nightmare. That is why in 2007, when the UK discovered that many of their caterpillars were falling victim to what became known as zombie virus, we all said we've had enough, especially now that we've all gone through a pandemic. That kind of energy needs to be as far away from me as possible. The caterpillars were being infected with baculovirus, which stops their molting and encourages them to continue eating. Once they've eaten a bunch and they're full to the brim, the virus then tells them to head high onto a leaf, which, like, if we weren't talking about a virus that's killing them, that would have been the cutest little sentence. High on a little leaf? Anyway, it's not cute and it's sad. Basically, once they're on this leaf, if a bird doesn't snatch them up, warning, this is kinda gross, their body liquefies and explodes, and then the virus is spread onto other caterpillars below. Yeah, see? Let's all move on and forget it ever happened. The caterpillars are good, everyone's fine. In our number 7 spot today, we have Y2K. If you're 15 years old watching this video, listen up. Computers have been here for your whole life, but they really aren't that old. You're 15 and they're barely older than you. So when the year 2000 rolled around, everyone started freaking out because we didn't know if the computers knew about the year 2000. Basically, many computer programs at the time only accepted 2 digits for the year, like 99 instead of 1999, so everyone was freaked out that the computers would be unable to operate once the clock rolled over to 2000, because what if they think it's 1900 instead? People were worried that planes were gonna fall out of the sky, they thought that the system would reboot, think it's 1900 again, and be like, dang, we're supposed to be made out of wood. The pilot turns into the Wright brothers. Okay, but seriously, we're expecting the year change to bring down computer infrastructures like those for banking and power plants, but in the end, millions and millions of dollars were spent to create software and workarounds for this situation, and we entered a new millennia. Let's not even start talking about 2012. In our number 6 spot today, we have teeth. Okay, people keep finding teeth. And like a lot of them. On 2 separate occasions, construction workers found more than 1,000 human teeth in one spot, and these 2 separate occasions happened in entirely different parts of the world. Workers in an Australian metro tunnel found a huge supply of human teeth that were over a century old, and with it they found some precious stones and cool artifacts, which made the whole teeth thing less worse, but I'm still undecided on whether or not it's worth it. Then, literally 2 months later, a team of construction workers in Georgia found another bunch of human teeth in the wall of a commercial building. My first thought is serial killer, but luckily this one isn't as grim. Documents showed that both of these places used to be the sites of dental offices, and the fact that these discoveries happened so close to one another was simply just a weird coincidence. In our number 5 spot today, we have starlight. This is an insane substance that was created in the 1970s and 80s by a hairstylist and amateur chemist, Maurice Ward. Amateur chemist is like the funniest term in the world to me. Like, so was Walter White. Anyway, Maurice was able to create starlight, which was like a heat-resistant plastic that was virtually indestructible. It could withstand temperatures of up to 10,000 degrees Celsius, and it could withstand the force of 75 times that of an atomic bomb. Of course, people were begging Maurice for the recipe for this substance, and places like NASA were dying to get their hands on it. Well, Maurice was not about to let his superpower get out into the world because he feared what would happen if the recipe for it fell into the wrong hands. Seems like Maurice read a comic book or two. Watch out, Tom Holland, Maurice is coming for your job. Maurice took the secret of how to make starlight with him to the grave and never told a soul how he managed to make it. It appears it may have been able to be recreated, however, or at least something similar in the last few years by a company called ThermoShield. Maybe this will be a good thing, and maybe it's the beginning of the end. Can't wait till we find out. Hope they at least film it in IMAX. In our number 4 spot today, we have Agent Orange. Okay, we've been having a silly fun time on this list today, but not everything can be silly and fun and sunshine and rainbows, and sometimes we have to talk about real life. Agent Orange is not Cody Banks' cousin, but it was an extremely potent herbicide that was used from 1961 to 1971 in the Vietnam War. It was intended to cut through the canopy of thick foliage in Vietnam in order to reveal the troops underneath, but instead it proved to be extremely deadly to humans. It caused cancers, birth defects, and so many more different health issues. And it's not like it was just a little bit. 21 million gallons of it were sprayed over Vietnam, which affected hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese citizens, and it also affected the US veterans who were exposed to it as well. While this is a dark part of history and it is difficult to hear about, it is also important that we don't forget things like these. Knowing our history is very important so we don't make the same mistakes again. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Mars Climate Orbiter. Listen guys, we all make mistakes. Sometimes when you hear about other people's mistakes, it makes you feel better about your own because at least I don't work for NASA. So when I make a mistake, I just have to read comments about it. No one is mad at me for wasting millions of dollars, just precious minutes of your life. The Mars Climate Orbiter was a robotic space probe that was launched by NASA in 1998 in order to study the Martian climate and then the Martian atmosphere. Unfortunately, in 1999, all communication with the spacecraft was lost because it ended up on a trajectory that flew it too close to the planet. Its fate either left it destroyed in the atmosphere or it escaped the planet's vicinity and ended up orbiting around the sun. Once an investigation into how this happened occurred, it was discovered that it was due to mismatched measurements between the two software systems, as NASA was using SI units while Martin Lockheed, who created one piece of ground software, used United States customary units. Yeah, I feel way less bad that I was 15 minutes late this morning. Sorry boss, I'm running on UK time right now. I guess I'm actually a couple hours early. In our number 2 spot today, we have Osmosis Jones 2, Return of the Jones. Here's the thing, antibiotics are super important for us and our health and are one of the most important advancements of modern medicine, but because people use them improperly, bacteria that is resistant to the medicine we have is being created, and that is a big problem. We wish we could forget it, but we can't because it's a threat to us all. Have you ever had strep throat before and they're giving you antibiotics to treat it and they tell you to make sure you take all of them even if you feel better? Yeah, there's a reason. You gotta make sure that the thing is dead and gone before you stop taking those things, or else they can learn how to fight back against basically our only line of defense. The rise of these resistant bacteria would place us in a very dark time. We're not just talking about more infections, we're talking about a collapse of healthcare. We can't do surgeries, people can't get treatment, and it's awful. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. In our number 1 spot today, we have the nothingness. You ever just sit back and think about how we're literally just floating through vast nothingness? Here on Earth, at least we have some kind of a sense of stability. Like, we're connected to the Earth through gravity, we have our cozy home in our solar system, we've got an orbit going around the sun, we've got a pet we call the moon. Things feel like home here. But when we think about it, the universe is impossibly large. Perhaps infinitely large, and we're just like smaller than a speck of dust within it. Every point in the universe is expanding away from every other point. There's no axis, there's no center, it's just endless space? I don't know. I get it, but I don't. It seems impossible, but it's just reality. I'm stressed, you're stressed, but we don't matter. What could possibly matter when there's just so much but absolutely nothing? Anyway, I'm gonna go stress about learning Excel now. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have honk. The dinosaurs are one of the first things we learn about in school because they're cool, and they also once were basically the rulers of the earth. I mean, you stand up next to a T-Rex and tell them off. When we think of dinosaurs, we also often think of the classic Jurassic Park movies, which sees the dinosaurs screeching and roaring and running around. But as more researchers conducted surrounding dinosaurs and the evolution of the voice box, it turns out that these screeches and roars, although terrifying, are likely not at all what dinosaurs sounded like. If you're wondering what they did sound like, you might want to turn your attention to a crocodile or perhaps a goose. Birds and crocodile-like reptiles are the closest living descendants to dinosaurs. In 1992 in Antarctica, researchers found a fossil of a duck and goose ancestor that lived 66 million years ago during the time of the dinosaurs. In 2013 it was realized that this fossil had the oldest known representation of the voice box ever discovered, and from here they could figure out what sounds it was actually capable of making. Because they were able to tell that this animal likely sounded quite similar to the ducks and geese of today, and the fact that this vocalization was actually quite sophisticated in terms of anatomy, it is likely that the more primitive iterations remain to be discovered. While we look at our major predators today like lions and bears and hear their roars and assume that that's what all predators sound like, it makes way more accurate scientific sense to look at their closest living relatives, i.e. crocodiles, to hear a more accurate representation of what they actually sounded like. Now imagine Jurassic Park, but all Canadian geese instead. Like, there's no way you're getting your car through that. Honestly, potentially even more frightening than dinosaurs, I'm not gonna lie. In our number 9 spot today we have the Mars mission. When it comes to space exploration, we love looking at Mars. I mean, I completely understand why. It seems to have quite a rich history that is just waiting to be uncovered, and while we've sent a couple sweet little rover robots over there to check things out for us, there are plans and talks of a manned mission to Mars. This would be incredible except for one major flaw we seem to be forgetting about. Not only is the entire mission to Mars a risky one, I mean it's really far away, but the whole planet is constantly being bombarded with radiation as well. Beyond the wonderful protective shield we have here on Earth called the magnetosphere, space is full of energetic charged particles. So, because a mission to Mars would require extended flight time for the astronauts who were sent on the mission, they'd be spending way more time flying through these particles, and that could cause damage not just to their bodies, but to their brains as well. Studies suggest that a mission to Mars could put the astronauts at risk of cognitive impairment in memory, multitasking, and decision-making skills, as well as increasing depression and anxiety. Literally just a nice complete package full of all of the things you absolutely do not want while flying through space for 365 million kilometers. Yeah, I'd also like to forget that, but we can't because people's safety is at risk when we talk about things like this. Now it's up to the experts to find a way to effectively block this radiation, which is said to originate from ancient supernovas. While the radiation is certainly inconvenient for us, it is cool to see how these things that happened so long ago still affect us and space today. In our number 8 spot today we have Chill Out. This one is for all you cynics out there, which, to be truthful, is a lot of us. We live in an increasingly negative society, and as it turns out, this could be having more of an effect on us than anyone really realizes. Research has shown that bad or negative attitudes could actually be shortening your life. Persistent negativity has the ability to basically rewire your brain, and apparently even one short burst of anger can impair your immune system for hours afterwards. We are all human, and sometimes we're going to be upset or angry or feel negative feelings, but long-term negativity and stress can cause skin conditions, high blood pressure, heart attacks, and even stroke. Maybe it's time to think first before being rude to someone for no reason, or getting angry about that small thing, or maybe even before leaving a rude comment on someone's YouTube video. You know, I'm just looking out for your health. A 2009 study found that out of 100,000 women that they studied, the most cynical participants were more likely to have heart disease. Not only is life just better when you treat people with kindness, but it might even reflect in your health. Who would have thought? In our number 7 spot today we have the helium problem. Okay, so this is one discovery that I actually had never heard of. Maybe it's because I'm out of touch, maybe it's because it's just something we don't talk about. The Earth has a finite amount of helium, and we are in the stage of running out. This seemingly wouldn't be that bad, but one of the main implications of this has to do with the fact that MRI machines need liquid helium to cool the superconducting magnets that live inside of the machine. At some point, we're gonna have to start rationing the helium that exists on Earth, and that means that many hospitals will one day no longer be able to offer MRIs. We all know what this means for many of the people who don't happen to be in the top 1%. This is just one implication, however, because helium is used for a wide variety of things. Like as one example, it was an essential on the first trip to the moon. The world's helium supply is located in only a few countries, the United States, Algeria, and Qatar, and shortages or issues in production could cause prices to skyrocket or just other things that limit the access to it. In our number 6 spot today we have A Bug's Life. Okay, if you know me, you know that I hate bugs with an immense passion, so I wanted to be excited about this one, but knowing the environmental implications, I cannot be. Right now, the world has 70% less insects on average than it did 40 years ago. In my world, that's great, there's no issues with that, we love to see it, no offense to the bugs, they just aren't really my cup of tea. Here's the thing though, while there are some bugs we could probably say goodbye to and still get on really well, insect pollinators are not in that group, and those numbers are dwindling just like the rest. Pollinators are vital to crops everywhere, and without them we could be facing some serious issues. Recently, in years past, places in China have had issues with their apple and pear crops, and it's been so bad in some areas that they've been forced to pollinate crops by hand. Another issue with the dwindling of insects is that they are a source of food for many animals, and without them, well, I mean, it's pretty obvious that without them there's no food for these creatures, and if they die, then their predators don't get food. You see, it's a whole cycle, and each level is extremely important. Ecosystems sit in a delicate balance, and as humans, we love to mess with that balance. In our number 5 spot today we have the Hindenburg. Speaking of the whole helium problem thing from before, let's talk about blimps. That seems like a weird transition, but those floating airships commonly use helium in them. That was, except in 1931 when an airship named the Hindenburg was designed. The makers of this guy decided to try out hydrogen instead of helium to try and make it float. If you know about the elements, you know that hydrogen is highly more volatile than helium, which is exactly why helium was used in the first place. So, when the Hindenburg floated off, it disastrously caught fire during its flight with 97 people on board. I didn't know people went up in those things. I thought that was purely just for advertising. I genuinely had no idea. Sadly, due to the fire, there were 35 casualties on board the flight that day. It is a horrendous situation that teaches a very valuable lesson. I had no idea that something like this had happened, and it's important to remember because this was clearly an avoidable mistake. In our number 4 spot today we have the parachute jacket. Have you ever wanted to go skydiving but also felt passionately about looking high fashion? Well, don't. French tailor Franz Reichelt was often referred to as the flying tailor because he was talented at his job but also loved parachuting. He wanted to design a sort of parachute jacket, but of course not made out of regular parachute material. It was just a jacket that was designed to act like a parachute, if that makes sense. Jacket material, not parachute material. Anyway, he was so confident in his work and his new invention that he decided to test it out himself. He decided to jump off the Eiffel Tower to show how well this jacket worked, but things took a very unfortunate turn. The jacket did not work, and Franz sadly lost his life. This is certainly a failed invention that we can leave in the past, but we should not forget Franz. In our number 3 spot today we have styrofoam. People all over the world are starting to understand the effect we as humans have on our world and how the use of things like plastics and styrofoam are affecting our environment. Styrofoam is thankfully being phased out in many ways because it harms us all. Created by the Dow Chemical Company in 1941, this light, buoyant substance can be used in a variety of ways, and it works as a great insulator, but despite how useful it may be, that does not change the fact that styrene, which is one of the 57 chemicals released during the creation of styrofoam, has been deemed as a possible carcinogen. This, coupled with the environmental impact of styrofoam, as in many cases it can't be recycled, which means it's doomed to sit for the rest of forever in a landfill since it doesn't biodegrade, just makes it an invention that clearly needs to be left way in the past. We have other, better alternatives that won't harm us, the people who make them, or this planet that we are lucky enough to call home. In our number 2 spot today we have leaded petrol. This is the common name for tetraethyl lead, or TEL, and while in the 1920s it was initially seen as a fantastic new compound that was quickly added to gasoline, the issues with it were soon realized. It was cheap, it upped not only the octane but also the engine compression in vehicles. People loved it, but what they didn't realize is that it was extremely toxic, polluting, and it was leading to lead poisoning in a lot of people. Apparently they were also able to link the leaded petrol to an increase in violent crimes because it is said that the neurotoxins can cause harmful side effects in the brain. Like, that's crazy. These were the immediate effects that could be seen, and thankfully this was enough for us to stop this method, but the lasting impacts are of course still around to this day. The chlorofluorocarbons that were produced by the lead petrol still have an impact and an effect on our environment and climate today. In our number 1 spot today we have the Dome. I've talked about Bikini Island and just the Marshall Islands in general a lot on this channel, but today I have to share with you something that I actually didn't know about before in regards to this location. If you aren't familiar, the Bikini Atoll was the site of a ton of major US nuclear weapons tests in the time just after World War II. The residents were promised it would one day be safe to return to, but of course that wasn't true. So from 1946 to 1958 there were 60 weapons tested here, which left a ton of nuclear waste. This led to all the waste being buried in a 30-foot deep cavern that they then sealed with a concrete dome. Yeah, I knew about the tests, but I didn't know about this hole in the ground. So to make this already uneasy story a little worse, the concrete dome I mentioned is now cracking and leaking into a nearby lagoon. Like, the waste site is holding 35 Olympic-sized pools worth of radioactive soil and debris, including a ton of plutonium. After Congress began to grow concerned over the cracking dome, the Department of Energy went to check it out, and their report stated that while sea level rise could increase storm surge, swells, and quote, lead to wave-induced overwash of lower sections of the dome, there's not enough definitive data to determine, quote, how these events might impact the environment. I don't know about you, but that seems pretty ominous. Turns out that no one is exactly happy with this answer, so I guess we'll all just have to wait and see how this one plays out in the end, I guess. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have the Library of Alexandria. The loss of this library truly is one of the greatest losses we have had as humans. This library is famed because it held a collection of over 1 million scrolls, which are said to have been all of the written works in the world at the time. The library was founded in 300 BC, and it was where the scholars of the time would come to study. It is said that when a person visited the library, they needed to give over any books they had so that they could be copied and added to the collection of the library. It isn't exactly clear what it was that destroyed the library, but rumors range from Julius Caesar accidentally setting it on fire to an invasion that set it ablaze. At the end of the day, the building burned and everything in it was destroyed, and to this day, no one has really been held responsible. Not that that would lessen the tragedy of the situation. What was in that building was absolutely priceless, and we can only guess as to what secrets it held. Unfortunately, many of what was in the library wasn't written anywhere else, so it's destined to stay a mystery, and it still goes down in history as the single greatest loss of knowledge in the world ever. In our number 9 spot today, we have the lifeboats. The Titanic is certainly one of the most well-known ocean-related tragedies, and for a fair reason. At the time of the Titanic's sinking, it was carrying around 2,208 passengers. That's obviously quite a fair amount of people. Want to know how many lifeboats they had? 20, with an additional 4 that were collapsible. I think some quick math can show us all how insane that is. This was only enough for half of the passengers if they had time to launch them all, which they didn't, and having such a low stock of lifeboats was actually a decision that was made consciously. Apparently, before the ship set sail, there was a decision made to reduce the number of lifeboats on board because they didn't want to clutter the deck. They thought the Titanic was unsinkable, so surely they wouldn't need a full stock of lifeboats. Unfortunately, this decision was a regrettable one because it is very possible that those extra lifeboats could have saved way more lives. In our number 8 spot today, we have the USS William D. Porter. This one isn't really so much of a moment and more so a collection of kind of hilarious and embarrassing moments from the career of the World War II destroyer, the USS William D. Porter. The trouble started before the boat even left the dock. Apparently, someone forgot to raise the anchor all the way up, which meant that as they slowly backed up, they also dragged the anchor along the tied-up deck of their sister ship. Just imagine working on the ship and just sitting there watching it rip through the sides, the railings, the lifeboats, just so much stuff on one of your other ships. Shortly after this, because of a failure to disarm their anti-submarine weapons, a live depth charge, which is just like a huge bomb that can sink down to get the other submarines, so one of those just falls onto the deck into the ocean while the president is on board. and it exploded. Okay, so a huge explosion in the ocean of course sets off the sonar on every single ship, which leads to all the other ships trying to track this one down while also doing evasive maneuvers, and those on board the USS William D. Porter needed to get the heck out of there because they had the president with them. The rest of the career of this ship involves almost accidentally killing the president again, and they also ended up firing a shell at the base commander's house, again on accident. All in all, this ship seemed to just be doomed to live a life full of embarrassing mistakes. In the end, the ship was taken out by an airplane that had already crashed. Luckily, the ship sank without loss of any of the crew, though. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Despite it being such a huge tourist attraction, the Leaning Tower of Pisa was never meant to lean. The tower is the freestanding bell tower of the cathedral of the Italian city of Pisa, and it is known throughout the world. The foundation of the tower is said to have been built on a clay mixture that simply wasn't strong enough for the tower, which has led to the weight of it pulling the structure downward. Instead of fixing it when they first realized, they apparently just decided to stop construction for 100 years, hoping that it would just sort itself out. I love that should be good mentality. Well, it was not good. 100 years later, when construction resumed, they tried to fix the lean by making one side of the top floor taller than the other, but this just made the lean worse. By 1990, the tilt was 5.5 degrees, which led to work in both 1993 and 2001 being done in order to stabilize the tower, which ended up reducing the tilt back down to a better but still slightly unnerving 3.97 degrees. While the tower is certainly not what it set out to be, I think accidentally creating one of the world's largest tourist attractions is still pretty cool. In our number 6 spot today, we have the posthumous execution. Okay, so this is something that has actually happened more than once, but I just found out it's happened at all, and I am both slightly confused and absolutely disgusted at the idea, so I needed to share one example with you guys. So, there was a man named Oliver Cromwell who Wikipedia describes as, quote, an English general and statesman who, first as a subordinate and later as commander-in-chief, led armies of the Parliament of England against King Charles I during the English Civil War, subsequently ruling the British Isles as Lord Protector from 1653 until his death in 1658. So, in 1658, Oliver passed away fairly suddenly, and his son Richard became Lord Protector, but because he had no power base in Parliament or the army, he had to resign just the following year, which effectively ended the Protectorate. Since there was no clear leadership during this time, George Monk was able to have the Long Parliament restored. He then made some slight constitutional adjustments so that Charles II could be invited back from exile in 1660 and actually be a king again under the restored monarchy. So then on January 30th, 1661, on what was the 12th anniversary of the execution of King Charles I, Oliver's body was exhumed and executed posthumously. They killed a dead guy. I get that it's like symbolic, but it's also a little redundant, don't we think? Anyway, his head was cut off and displayed outside of Westminster Hall until 1685. Afterwards, it had a series of different owners, which only adds to the oddity of this story. It is said that the head is now buried beneath the floor of the antechapel at Sidney Sussex College in Cambridge and has been there since 1960. The exact location is not public knowledge, but there is a plaque that is said to mark its approximate location. Imagine just like having a head around. Your friends come over and you're like, don't worry, that's just Oliver Cromwell. Long story. In our number 5 spot today, we have the games. For this one, we are throwing it back to the 67 CE Olympics. The Roman Emperor Nero was known for making bribes, and one of the first is believed to be the bribe that allowed him to compete in the games, which used to only be limited to Greeks. Nero certainly wasn't trying to hide his bribery or cheating, however, as the most blatant example of it was when he competed in the 4-horse chariot race with 10 horses. You'd think they would have tried to just be like a little more covert, but I guess not. This isn't even the end of it though, considering it is believed that he fell from the chariot and didn't even finish the event. Imagine bribing your way in, cheating immensely, and then still being so bad you can't even finish the race. This somehow isn't even the end of the story, however, as he was still named as the winner. I'm not sure what's shadier, trying to hide your cheating or bribing your way to victory, or not trying to hide it at all. Either way, I'm glad this story survived all these years because it truly is just unbelievable. I kind of feel bad for everyone else who had to compete that year though. Literally, there was no way you could have won, even if you did. With 4 horses. In our number 4 spot today, we have Operation Cottage. This operation was a tactical maneuver which completed the Aleutian Islands campaign in World War II, and it was a joint services assault on the island of Kiska. On August 15, 1943, Allied military forces landed on the island with the aim to eliminate the Imperial Japanese forces that had occupied the island since June 1942. Unbeknownst to the Allied forces, however, the Japanese forces had secretly abandoned the island 2 weeks earlier under the cover of thick fog using submarines and ships. So basically what I'm saying is that when the Allied forces landed here, they were unopposed. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that no one lost their lives, however. There were around 313 casualties, which were a result of stray Japanese landmines, vehicle accidents, and mostly a series of friendly fire incidents. Most of the friendly fire incidents were between Canadian and American troops as they mistook each other for Japanese forces as they had come from opposite sides of the island. In our number 3 spot today, we have Laika. On this list today, we've had a fair share of embarrassing little tidbits, all the way to small mistakes that had major devastating consequences, and I'd say this is one moment that was thought through and planned out, so it certainly wasn't a mistake. It was just a decision made without conscience, or with some serious moral complications. Laika was a stray dog who was taken from the streets of Moscow and selected to be the occupant of the Soviet spacecraft Sputnik 2 that was launched into low orbit on November 3rd, 1957. She became one of the first animals in space and became the first animal to orbit Earth. On this mission, there was no plan for her to ever be recovered or for her to even survive. Instead, the plan was to euthanize her via poison, but even this horrible plan fell through as she passed away from overheating and asphyxiation beforehand. There was little known at the time of this mission as to what spaceflight would do to living creatures, and so it was thought that animal flights were a necessary precursor to human flights. The experiment was aimed to prove that humans could endure spaceflight, and it did pave the way for future space exploration, as the mission gave data on how living organisms react to spaceflight, which has definitely gone on to give extremely valuable insights to researchers and scientists. It is a horribly sad story, and it leaves many people with a lot of questions. There's no doubt that the mission gave us tons of information that has truly helped in terms of sending humans to space, but at what cost? Let's have some civil, level-headed discussions in the comments about this one. I'm interested to hear everyone's thoughts and feelings about this. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Orbiter. The Mars Climate Orbiter was a robotic space probe that was launched by NASA in 1998 in order to study the Martian climate and the Martian atmosphere. Unfortunately, in 1999, all communication with the spacecraft was lost because it ended up on a trajectory that flew it way too close to the planet. Its fate either left it destroyed in the atmosphere, or it escaped the planet's vicinity and ended up orbiting around the sun. Once an investigation into how this happened occurred, it was discovered that it was due to mismatched measurements between the two software systems, as NASA was using SI units while Martin Lockheed, who created one piece of ground software, used United States customary units. Yeah, they just used half of one measurement and half the other. At least when I screw up at my job, I don't waste billions of dollars, I just have to read comments about it. See you down there. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Battle of Karen Sebez. In the Battle of Karen Sebez, which occurred in 1788, the Austrians were at war with the Ottomans, and they sent out scouts which were tasked with searching for Turkish spies. These scouts ended up encountering a group of Romani people, and they all ended up having a bit of a party together. Everyone's getting loose, everyone's having a good time, and then a group from the Austrian infantry show up, and they just want to join in on the fun, but these scouts, who were already a little too loose, they got all possessive and weird and decided to build a barricade around the alcohol and set up a defense. From here, the infantry continued to press on, and a shot was fired. That is when a fight erupted, and the Austrian army began to mistake the scouts who were fleeing as Turks, which then led to them opening fire. Then things erupted even further because the rest of the Romani people figured that they were being attacked, of course, and they also started shooting and fleeing. This basically led to the Austrian army taking the lives of 10,000 of their own men because they accidentally attacked themselves. To make matters even worse for them, when the Turks actually arrived the next day, the Austrian army was easily defeated because they had basically already defeated themselves, and they claimed the city of Karen Sebez.